When Officer Maria Santos lost her hearing in the line of duty, everyone expected her to retire quietly from the police force. Instead, she did something extraordinary. She taught her German Shepherd partner Rocky to understand sign language, creating the only canine unit in the country capable of communicating in complete silence. 3 years later, 7-year-old Danny Martinez disappeared from Meadowbrook Park while playing with his favorite toy airplane. The search teams called his name across the city, but Danny couldn't hear them. He was deaf, mute, and utterly alone in the hands of a kidnapper who didn't understand that Danny's silence wasn't defiance. It was simply how he had always lived in the world. As hope began to fade and traditional search methods failed, Rocky's unique training would prove to be more than just an innovative police technique. In the basement of an abandoned factory, a scared little boy was about to meet the only rescuer in the world who could truly understand his desperate attempts to communicate. This isn't just a story about a missing child. It's about the moment when two souls who spoke the same silent language found each other in the darkness and discovered that some bonds transcend every barrier humans create between themselves and the beings who love them unconditionally. The morning sun cast long golden shadows across Meadowbrook Park, painting the world in hues of amber and emerald. 7-year-old Danny Martinez sat cross-legged on the soft grass near the duck pond, his dark eyes sparkling with wonder as he watched the ripples dance across the water's surface. To most people, the park was filled with the cheerful sounds of children's laughter, barking dogs, and rustling leaves. But Danny's world was beautifully silent, a canvas painted with vibrations, colors, and movements that spoke to him in ways words never could. His small fingers traced patterns in the dirt beside him, feeling the tiny tremors that traveled through the ground each time a duck splashed into the water. Danny's face lit up with pure joy as he felt the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of their webbed feet paddling beneath the surface. He didn't need to hear their quacking to know they were happy. He could see it in their graceful movements, in the way the water droplets caught the sunlight like tiny diamonds falling from their feathers. From her bench 30 feet away, Sarah Martinez watched her son with a mixture of overwhelming love and quiet worry etched across her gentle features. Her heart swelled with pride as she observed Danny's unique way of connecting with the world around him. He communicated with nature in a language all his own, through touch, through observation, through the pure innocence of a child who had never known the barrier of sound, and therefore had never built walls against wonder. Sarah's fingers nervously twisted the strap of her purse as she noticed a group of children playing nearby. They were around Danny's age, their voices carrying on the breeze as they called to each other in games of tag and hide-and-seek. She had seen this scene play out countless times before. Children approaching Danny with curiosity, their faces lighting up with initial interest, only to drift away when they realized he couldn't respond to their chatter in the way they expected. Danny seemed oblivious to this social dance happening around him. He reached into the small paper bag beside him and pulled out pieces of bread, tossing them gently toward the water. The ducks immediately converged, creating tiny tsunamis with their eager splashing. Danny pressed his palm flat against the ground, feeling the vibrations of their excitement travel up through his arm. His mouth curved into a radiant smile, the kind of pure, unguarded happiness that only children possess. A little girl with pigtails ventured closer, drawn by Danny's obvious delight with the ducks. She said something to him, her voice bright and friendly. When Danny didn't respond, continuing to focus on the ducks, she tried again, this time waving her hand in front of his face. Danny looked up then, his eyes meeting hers with genuine warmth. He pointed to the ducks and then to his bag of bread, his meaning clear even without words. The girl smiled and sat down beside him, accepting a piece of bread. For a few precious moments, they shared the simple joy of feeding the ducks together. But when she began chattering excitedly about the ducks, asking Danny questions he couldn't hear, the barrier became apparent. Her face fell slightly with confusion, and she glanced around uncertainly before slowly getting up and returning to her group of friends. Sarah's heart clenched as she watched this familiar scenario unfold. She had built a protective bubble around Danny, filled with love, understanding, and acceptance. But she couldn't extend that bubble to encompass the entire world. She couldn't make other children understand that Danny's silence wasn't rejection or rudeness, but simply a different way of being. Danny seemed unaffected by the girl's departure. He continued his private communion with the ducks, occasionally looking up to catch his mother's eye and flash her one of his brilliant smiles. In those moments, Sarah was reminded that while Danny might live in a world without sound, it was far from empty. It was rich with textures, patterns, vibrations, and visual poetry that most people rushed past without noticing. As the ducks finished the last of the bread and began to drift away, Danny stood up and brushed the grass from his jeans. He walked over to his mother, his small hand finding hers, with the unconscious trust that only exists between a child and a parent who has never let them down. Sarah squeezed his hand gently, and Danny responded with 3 quick squeezes back, their secret code for "I love you." In this moment of perfect connection between mother and son, neither of them could imagine that their peaceful world was about to be shattered. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the park's edge, studying Danny's isolation with calculating eyes. The protective bubble Sarah had so carefully constructed around her son was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined possible. Miles away from Meadowbrook Park, at the Riverside County Police Training Facility, a magnificent 4-year-old German shepherd named Rocky sat at perfect attention. His intelligent amber eyes focused intently on the hands of the woman standing before him. Officer Maria Santos moved her fingers in deliberate, graceful patterns, each gesture flowing into the next like a silent symphony. Rocky's ears perked forward, his entire body language demonstrating the deep concentration he brought to this unique form of communication. "Stay," Maria's hands commanded, and Rocky remained motionless as a statue, even when she walked behind him where he couldn't see her signals. "Come," her fingers spelled out when she returned to face him, and Rocky rose smoothly, approaching her with the controlled precision that marked him as an exceptional police dog. But what made Rocky truly extraordinary wasn't just his obedience or his keen intelligence. It was his profound understanding of the language of silence. Maria knelt down and cupped Rocky's noble head in her hands, her own eyes reflecting the deep bond they had forged through months of patient training. 3 years ago, Officer Maria Santos had been one of the most promising canine handlers in the department, her career trajectory pointing toward leadership positions and commendations. Then, in one terrible moment during a drug bust gone wrong, a concussion grenade had stolen her hearing, transforming her world from one of constant radio chatter and verbal commands into profound silence. Many had expected Maria to take early retirement, to fade quietly into civilian life. Instead, she had fought to stay on the force, determined to prove that her disability didn't diminish her value as an officer. The department, initially skeptical, had eventually allowed her to develop a specialized training program, teaching select canine units to respond to sign language in addition to verbal commands. Rocky had been her star pupil from the very beginning. While other dogs in the program learned to follow hand signals as an additional skill, Rocky seemed to understand that this silent language was something deeper, more meaningful. He responded not just to Maria's specific gestures, but to the subtle emotions behind them. When Maria felt frustrated by the world's lack of understanding, Rocky would rest his head on her lap with uncanny timing. Compassion. One hand cradling the other, both moving in a gentle circle over the heart. You understand this better than most humans, boy. Remember that when you meet someone who needs understanding. Now, as Rocky worked with his new partner, Officer James Davis, the lessons Maria had taught him remained embedded in his consciousness. Davis was a good man, patient, dedicated, and genuinely caring. But he approached police work with traditional methods and straightforward thinking. He appreciated Rocky's exceptional tracking abilities and his unwavering loyalty, but he didn't fully grasp the depth of the dog's unusual training. I don't know why Maria filled your head with all that sign language stuff, Davis often muttered as he watched Rocky's ears perk up at distant hand movements from strangers. We've got radios and verbal commands. Keep it simple, partner. But Rocky's instincts told him that his special training served a purpose beyond simple communication. During their patrols, he found himself naturally drawn to certain people, an elderly man whose trembling hands reminded him of Maria's careful gestures, a young mother whose baby used hand movements to communicate before learning to speak. Rocky seemed to possess an innate understanding that some souls spoke in frequencies that others couldn't hear, and that these people often needed extra compassion and protection. Davis had begun to notice Rocky's unusual behavior patterns, though he couldn't quite make sense of them yet. During community policing events, Rocky would gravitate toward children who seemed isolated or different, approaching them with a gentleness that went beyond his standard police training. He would sit quietly beside elderly residents who spent their days alone, seeming to offer comfort through his mere presence. "You've got good instincts, boy," Davis would say, scratching behind Rocky's ears. "Sometimes I think you see things the rest of us miss." Rocky's brown eyes would meet his partner's with an expression that seemed almost knowing, as if he understood far more than a dog should about the complexities of human communication and the importance of reaching those who couldn't reach back in conventional ways. As their shift ended that evening, Davis loaded Rocky into their patrol car, unaware that tomorrow would bring a case that would test every aspect of the dog's unique abilities. Rocky settled into his familiar spot, his keen senses already picking up subtle changes in the wind patterns that carried scents and stories from across the city. Somewhere out there, a child who spoke the same silent language Maria had taught him was about to need his help desperately. Rocky rested his head on his paws, but his ears remained alert, as if his unconscious mind was already preparing for the most important case of his career. Excitement bubbling in his chest. Today was Saturday, which meant a long visit to his beloved Meadowbrook Park. As he dressed in his favorite red t-shirt and blue jeans, he carefully tucked his treasured toy airplane into his pocket. The small silver plane, a gift from his father, had become Danny's constant companion, a symbol of dreams that could soar beyond the boundaries of his silent world. Sarah packed their usual picnic lunch, including extra bread for the ducks, while stealing glances at her son's animated face. Danny's enthusiasm was infectious, expressed through his bright eyes and the bouncing spring in his step rather than words. He helped carry the picnic basket to the car, his small hands already practicing the sign for airplane as he anticipated playing with his toy in the open spaces of the park. The park was moderately busy when they arrived, with the perfect mix of families and solitude that Sarah preferred. She spread their blanket in their usual spot, close enough to the duck pond for Danny to enjoy his feathered friends, but far enough from the main playground to avoid the overwhelming chaos that sometimes made her son anxious. Danny immediately pulled out his airplane and began flying it in elaborate loops and spirals, his imagination transforming the simple toy into a magnificent aircraft soaring through clouds only he could see. Sarah watched him with that mixture of joy and protectiveness that had become second nature to her. In moments like these, when Danny was completely absorbed in his own world of wonder, she could almost forget the challenges they faced daily. What Sarah couldn't see, hidden behind the thick trunk of an old oak tree near the park's eastern boundary, was Marcus Webb. For 3 days he had been watching them, studying their routines with the methodical patience of someone whose mind had been twisted by grief and desperation. Marcus had once been a loving father himself, but the loss of his own 7-year-old son in a tragic accident had shattered something fundamental in his psyche. In his fractured thinking, Marcus had become convinced that taking someone else's child would somehow fill the aching void left by his son's death. He had chosen Danny specifically because of the boy's obvious vulnerability, a child who couldn't call for help, whose isolation made him an easier target. Marcus didn't understand or care about Danny's disability. He saw only opportunity in the boy's silence. "I'll just get us some ice cream," Sarah told Danny, using the simple signs they had developed for everyday communication. The ice cream vendor's cheerful bell had been ringing for several minutes, and she knew it would make Danny smile to watch the other children's excitement even if he couldn't participate fully in their jubilant shouting. Danny nodded enthusiastically and signed back, "Vanilla," holding up one finger to indicate his preference. Sarah kissed the top of his head, breathing in the familiar scent of his strawberry shampoo, and began walking toward the vendor's cart about 50 yards away. Danny continued playing with his airplane, completely absorbed in his imaginative flight patterns. He made the plane dive toward the ground and then soar upward in dramatic rescue missions. His face animated with the pure joy of play. He was so focused on his game that he didn't notice the shadow that fell across the grass beside him until it was too late. Marcus emerged from behind the tree with calculated casualness, approaching Danny with a friendly smile that masked his disturbed intentions. He had practiced this moment, rehearsing what he would say, how he would appear non-threatening. In his delusional state, he had convinced himself that he was rescuing Danny from a life of isolation, that taking the boy would somehow heal both of their wounded souls. "That's a really cool airplane," Marcus said, crouching down beside Danny with practiced friendliness. Danny looked up, startled but not immediately frightened. Strangers sometimes approached him at the park, usually with kind intentions. He held up his airplane proudly, his eyes bright with willingness to share his joy with someone who seemed interested. Marcus extended his hand. "Would you like to see a real airplane? I know where there's one parked nearby." Danny tilted his head, confused by the man's moving lips, but unable to understand the words. He pointed toward his mother, then back to himself, trying to communicate that he needed to stay close to Sarah. But Marcus had planned for this moment of resistance. Moving with surprising quickness, Marcus scooped Danny up, clamping one hand firmly over the boy's mouth, a meaningless gesture since Danny couldn't cry out anyway, but one that Marcus's panicked mind insisted was necessary. Danny's airplane fell to the grass as he struggled, his small fists beating against Marcus's chest in terror and confusion. The kidnapping happened in broad daylight, but Marcus had chosen his moment perfectly. Most park visitors were gathered around the playground on the opposite side, drawn by an impromptu puppet show. The few people in their area were absorbed in their own activities, and Marcus's movements appeared casual to anyone who might glance their way, just a father picking up his tired child. Within seconds, Marcus had carried Danny to the park's edge, where his white van waited with the engine running. He placed the struggling boy in the back, quickly securing him with rope he had prepared, and drove away just as casually as he had approached. Sarah returned from the ice cream vendor 3 minutes later, carrying 2 vanilla cones and wearing the contented smile of a mother anticipating her child's delight. That smile of panic. "Danny, where are you?" She spun in circles, scanning the park with desperate eyes, the ice cream cones forgotten and melting in her trembling hands. Other parents began to notice her distress, approaching with offers of help and growing concern. But Danny was nowhere to be seen, vanished as silently as he had lived, leaving behind only his treasured airplane and a mother's world shattered into pieces. The protective bubble Sarah had so carefully maintained around her son had been burst in a single terrible moment. And somewhere, across town, a little boy who had never needed his voice more desperately was being carried away from everything he knew and loved, unable to call for the help that was already frantically searching for him. Sarah's hands shook so violently that she could barely hold her phone steady as she dialed 911. The melted ice cream had long since dripped from her forgotten fingers onto the grass, creating sticky puddles that attracted confused ants. Her voice cracked and broke as the emergency dispatcher answered, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush that made little sense even to her own ears. "My son, he's gone. He was just here, and now—" Sarah gasped for breath, her chest tight with panic. "Please, you have to understand, he can't hear. He can't call for help." "Ma'am, I need you to slow down," the dispatcher said with practiced calm. "Tell me your location and we'll get someone there right away." "Meadowbrook Park, by the duck pond," Sarah sobbed, her eyes frantically scanning the area where Danny had been playing just minutes before. "His name is Danny Martinez. He's 7 years old and he's deaf and mute. Someone took him. Someone took my baby." The dispatcher's tone shifted immediately as she grasped the severity of the situation. A missing child was always urgent, but a disabled child who couldn't cry for help elevated the case to critical status. "Units are on their way, ma'am. Can you describe what your son was wearing?" Sarah forced herself to focus through her terror. Red t-shirt, blue jeans, white sneakers with dinosaur pictures on them. He has dark hair, brown eyes, and he was playing with a silver toy airplane. Her voice broke again as she looked at the abandoned toy. "The airplane is still here, but Danny's gone." Within minutes, the peaceful atmosphere of Meadowbrook Park was shattered by the arrival of multiple police vehicles, their red and blue lights painting the trees in urgent colors. The first responders moved with swift efficiency, but Sarah could see the additional concern in their faces when she explained Danny's disabilities. Officer Jennifer Walsh, the first on scene, immediately recognized the unique challenges they were facing. "A child who can't call for help changes everything," Officer Walsh. Within 15 minutes, her experienced eyes immediately assessing both the crime scene and the distraught mother. Chen had handled dozens of missing child cases throughout her career, but she understood that Danny's disabilities created complications that required a different approach entirely. Traditional search methods that relied on the child's ability to respond to calls or make noise were useless here. "Mrs. Martinez," Detective Chen said gently, kneeling beside Sarah, who was clutching Danny's airplane like a lifeline. I know this is terrifying, but I need you to help me understand exactly what happened. Every detail could be crucial." As Sarah recounted the events, describing Danny's routine, his behaviors, and the brief time she had been away, Detective Chen made careful notes. Her questions were precise and compassionate, designed to extract critical information without adding to the mother's trauma. She understood that in cases involving disabled children, the window for successful recovery was often narrower than usual. Word of Danny's disappearance spread through the community with the speed that only genuine crisis could generate. Parents who had been enjoying lazy Saturday afternoons with their own children began arriving at the park, their faces etched with the shared fear that strikes the heart of every parent when they hear those dreaded words, "missing child." Mrs. Rodriguez from Danny's school arrived with her husband and teenage sons, immediately organizing other parents into search teams. "Danny's such a sweet boy," she told Detective Chen, her voice thick with emotion. "He loves those ducks. He feeds them every weekend. He wouldn't just wander off." The impromptu search teams spread out across the park and into the surrounding neighborhoods, calling Danny's name even though they knew he couldn't hear them. There was something deeply human about their need to call out, to use their voices as tools of hope, even when logic told them it was futile. Children who had played alongside Danny, even briefly, held handmade signs with his picture, their young faces serious with the gravity of the situation. Meanwhile, Sarah's frantic calls to her husband, Michael, painted their family tragedy in stark relief. Michael was in the middle of an important client meeting at his engineering firm when his phone buzzed with his wife's first call. He had initially ignored it, planning to call back when the meeting ended. By the third consecutive call, his stomach was churning with premonition. "Michael, you need to come now," Sarah's broken voice pleaded through the phone. "Danny's gone. Someone took Danny from the park." The phone slipped from Michael's hands, clattering onto the conference room table as his world tilted off its axis. His colleagues watched in confusion as this normally composed man suddenly stood up, his face drained of all color. Kidnapped. The drive to the park became a blur of traffic lights that seemed to last forever, and speed limits that felt criminally restrictive. Michael's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles went white, his mind racing through a horrible kaleidoscope of possibilities. Danny's sweet face smiled at him from the family photo on his dashboard. The same picture they had taken just last month, when Danny had successfully spelled, "I love you, Daddy," in sign language for the first time. When Michael finally arrived at Meadowbrook Park, the sight of multiple police vehicles and the growing crowd of searchers hit him like a physical blow. This was real. This was happening to his family, to his precious boy, who had never hurt anyone, who communicated with the world through smiles and gentle touches and boundless love. Sarah collapsed into her husband's arms, both of them holding each other as their carefully constructed world crumbled around them. The protective bubble they had built around Danny had been shattered, and their son was somewhere out there, alone and frightened, unable to call their names or cry for help. The radio crackled to life in Officer Davis's patrol car, just as he and Rocky were finishing their routine patrol of the downtown district. "Canine unit to Meadowbrook Park. Missing child case, highest priority," dispatch announced with the clipped urgency that indicated a critical situation. Davis hit the sirens immediately, his experienced hands guiding the patrol car through traffic with practiced precision. In the passenger area, Rocky's ears perked up at the change in their routine, his body language shifting into the alert readiness that marked the beginning of serious work. The German Shepherd had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when their day was about to become something more than routine patrol. "Looks like we're needed, partner," Davis said, glancing in the rearview mirror at Rocky's intelligent amber eyes. "Missing 7-year-old, deaf and mute. This one's going to require all your special skills." Rocky seemed to understand the gravity in his handler's voice. His body settled into the focused calm that overtook him when his training kicked in, every sense becoming heightened and ready for the task ahead. Something deep in his consciousness, the part that Maria Santos had carefully nurtured during those months of patient training, stirred with recognition. A child who couldn't speak, couldn't call for help. This was exactly the type of person his special training had prepared him to assist. When they arrived at Meadowbrook Park, the scene was controlled chaos. Detective Chen immediately briefed Officer Davis on the situation while Rocky's keen nose began processing the complex mixture of scents that surrounded them. Dozens of people had trampled through the area, creating a challenging olfactory landscape. But Rocky's training allowed him to filter through the confusion with remarkable precision. "The boy was playing right here when he disappeared," Detective Chen explained, pointing to the spot where Danny's airplane still lay in the grass. "Mother was gone for maybe 3 minutes maximum. No witnesses to the actual abduction." Davis knelt down and carefully picked up the silver toy airplane, holding it out for Rocky to examine. "This is Danny's boy. Find Danny." The moment Rocky's sensitive nose caught Danny's scent from the airplane, something extraordinary happened. His entire demeanor shifted into a level of intensity that Davis had never seen before. Rocky's nostrils flared as he processed not just the scent but something deeper, an almost intuitive understanding of the child who had touched this toy with such obvious love and care. Rocky began his search pattern with methodical precision, his nose to the ground as he traced Danny's movements around their play area. Davis watched with growing amazement as his partner's behavior became more focused and determined than he had ever witnessed. Rocky wasn't just following a scent trail. He seemed to be thinking like the missing child, understanding how a 7-year-old boy might move, where he might go, what might attract his attention. "He's got something," Davis radioed to Detective Chen as Rocky's path became more decisive. The dog led them in widening circles around the original location, his body language indicating that he was processing multiple layers of information that went far beyond simple scent tracking. The search team spread out across the park and into the surrounding neighborhoods, their movements coordinated by Detective Chen's careful planning. Rocky led his portion of the team with unwavering determination, pausing occasionally to lift his head and test the air currents, as if he were reading invisible messages that only he could understand. Other parents and volunteers called Danny's name as they searched, their voices carrying across the afternoon air, even though they knew the boy couldn't hear them. There was something both heartbreaking and beautiful about their persistence, their refusal to give up on reaching a child who lived in a world beyond their vocal calls. Rocky's trail led them steadily toward the eastern edge of the park, past the old oak tree where Marcus had hidden during his surveillance, through the scattered picnic tables where families had been enjoying their Saturday afternoon. With each step, Rocky's certainty seemed to grow stronger, his pace becoming more urgent. The trail ended abruptly at the park's boundary, right at the curb where the street began. Rocky circled the area repeatedly, his confusion evident as he searched for a continuation of the scent that had simply vanished. Davis felt his heart sink as he realized what this meant. "The trail goes cold here," Davis reported into his radio, his voice grim with the implications. "Rocky's indicating the scent ends at the street. Someone used a vehicle." Detective Chen's voice crackled back immediately. "That confirms our worst fears. This wasn't a wandering child or a stranger encounter gone wrong. This was planned. Someone came here specifically to take Danny, and they had transportation ready." Rocky continued to circle the area where the scent ended, his agitation growing as his highly trained senses told him the story of what had happened. A child had been here, had struggled briefly, and then had simply disappeared from the earth as far as his nose could determine. The dog's brown eyes looked up at Davis with an expression that seemed almost human in its concern and determination. "I know, boy," Davis said softly, scratching behind Rocky's ears. "We're going to find him, whatever it takes." But even as he spoke the words of reassurance, Davis felt the weight of the challenge ahead. A disabled child, unable to call for help, was now in the hands of someone who had planned this abduction carefully. The clock was ticking, and every minute that passed made Danny's safe recovery less likely. Rocky sat at the edge of the curb, his nose still working to catch any trace of the scent that had vanished so completely. In his canine mind, the boy he was meant to find had become more than just another case. This was a child who spoke the same silent language that Maria had taught him to understand. A child who would need someone who could communicate without words when the time came for rescue. As the afternoon wore on, Detective Chen coordinated a methodical canvass of the businesses surrounding Meadowbrook Park, her experienced instincts telling her that someone, somewhere, had seen something crucial. The investigation shifted into the painstaking work of gathering evidence, security footage, witness statements, and the tiny details that often made the difference between a successful rescue and a family's worst nightmare. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Murphy's hardware store, located 2 blocks east of the park. Old Bill Murphy had installed security cameras 6 months ago after a break-in, and his system captured not just his storefront, but a significant portion of the street where Danny's scent trail had ended. There, Detective Chen pointed at the grainy black and white footage, her pulse quickening as she spotted what they were looking for. White van, older model, pulling away from the curb at 2:17 p.m. The timestamp matched perfectly with Sarah's estimate of when she had discovered Danny missing. The van was too far away and the image too blurry to make out license plate details, but it gave them their first solid lead. Someone driving a white van had been in the exact location where Rocky's scent trail ended at the precise time when Danny disappeared. "Can you enhance this image?" Detective Chen asked the technical specialist who had been called in to examine the footage. "I'll do what I can, but the resolution is pretty limited," the specialist replied. "Already the image. Might be able to get a better look at the van's make and model, but I doubt we'll get plate numbers from this distance." Meanwhile, the witness canvas was beginning to yield results, though not all of them were immediately helpful. Mrs. Patterson, who walked her elderly poodle past the park every afternoon, remembered seeing a man near the oak trees earlier in the week, but couldn't provide a detailed description. A teenager skateboarding through the area recalled noticing someone acting weird near the playground, but admitted he had been more focused on his phone than on the suspicious behavior. The most promising witness was 8-year-old Emma Chen, no relation to the detective, who had been playing on the swings with her older brother when Danny disappeared. When Detective Chen knelt down to Emma's eye level and spoke to her with the gentle patience she reserved for child witnesses, an important detail emerged. "I saw the boy with the airplane," Emma said, her voice small but certain. "He was showing it to a grown-up man. The man was talking to him, but the boy wasn't talking back. I thought that was strange." "Can you remember what the man looked like?" Detective Chen asked carefully, not wanting to influence the child's memory with leading questions. Emma screwed up her face in concentration. "He had brown hair, I think, and he was wearing a blue jacket maybe. He seemed nice at first, but then—" She trailed off, her young mind struggling to articulate something that had felt wrong, even though she couldn't explain why. "Then what happened, sweetie?" "Then he picked up the boy really fast, like when my daddy picks me up when I'm being silly. But the boy didn't look like he was being silly. He looked scared. Detective Chen felt the familiar chill that came with breakthrough testimony. Emma had witnessed the actual abduction, even if she hadn't understood what she was seeing at the time. The description was vague, but it was a starting point. A brown-haired man in a blue jacket who had approached Danny with apparent friendliness before taking him. Back at the search command post that had been established in the park's pavilion, Rocky seemed increasingly agitated. Officer Davis watched with growing concern as his partner paced restlessly, occasionally stopping to stare in the direction where the scent trail had ended. The dog's behavior was unlike anything Davis had seen before. Rocky appeared to be processing information on a level that went beyond his standard tracking protocols. "What is it, boy?" Davis asked, kneeling beside his partner. "What are you trying to tell me?" Rocky's response was to trot back toward the spot where Danny had been playing, his nose working intently as he re-examined scents he had already catalogued. Broader context of what had happened. Detective Chen noticed Rocky's behavior and approached Officer Davis with interest. "Your dog seems to be thinking about this case differently than a typical search." "Rocky's always been special," Davis admitted, still not fully understanding the extent of his partner's unique training. "Sometimes I think he picks up on things that the rest of us miss." As if to prove Davis's point, Rocky suddenly became very still, his attention focused on something that had caught his senses. He began moving with purpose toward a section of the park that hadn't been part of the original search area. A cluster of trees near the eastern boundary, where someone could have concealed themselves while watching the playground. Behind one of the larger oaks, Rocky found what his trained senses had been seeking, a small depression in the soft earth where someone had crouched for an extended period of time. The scent signature was complex: nervous perspiration, cigarette smoke, and something else that Rocky's sensitive nose identified as the lingering trace of motor oil and industrial chemicals. "Detective Chen," Davis called out, his voice tight with excitement. "I think Rocky found where our suspect was hiding." The discovery transformed the investigation from a frantic search into a methodical crime scene analysis. Evidence technicians carefully processed the hiding spot, finding cigarette butts, scuff marks in the soil, and, most importantly, clear footprint impressions that would help them identify the suspect's shoe size and gait pattern. As the sun began to set over Meadowbrook Park, casting long shadows across the scene of Danny's disappearance, Detective Chen prepared for what she knew would be one of the most difficult aspects of any missing child case: the media appeal. Danny's parents, devastated but desperate to reach anyone who might have information, agreed to appear on the evening news, despite their grief. The sight of Michael and Sarah Martinez standing before the television cameras, their faces etched with a parent's worst nightmare, was heartbreaking. But what made their plea truly powerful was their decision to use both spoken words and sign language, creating a bridge between the hearing and deaf communities that Danny himself embodied. "Please," Sarah said, her hands moving in graceful, desperate gestures even as her voice broke with emotion. "If you have seen our Danny, if you know anything that could help us bring him home, please call the police. He's just a little boy who can't call for help. He needs us, and we need him." Michael's hands joined his wife's in signing their son's name, a simple gesture that somehow conveyed both the depth of their love and the magnitude of their loss. The image of two parents using their child's own language to plead for his return. Late. As the first day of the search drew to a close, Rocky remained alert and ready, his exceptional senses continuing to process information that might lead them to the missing boy. Somewhere out there, a 7-year-old child who spoke with his hands instead of his voice was waiting for rescue. And Rocky's unique training might be the key to understanding how to find him. Danny's consciousness returned slowly, like surfacing from the deepest part of a dark lake. The first sensation that penetrated his confused mind was cold, a bone-deep chill that seemed to seep through his red t-shirt and into his very soul. His small body was curled on what felt like concrete, rough and unforgiving against his cheek. As awareness gradually returned, Danny's eyes fluttered open to absolute darkness. Terror struck him like a physical blow. This wasn't the gentle darkness of his bedroom at home, where familiar shapes and the faint glow of his nightlight created a landscape of safety. This was a complete, suffocating blackness that seemed to press against his eyes like a living thing. Danny's breath came in quick, panicked gasps as he struggled to understand where he was and how he had gotten there. His last clear memory was of playing with his airplane in Meadowbrook Park, the warm sun on his face, and the pleasant vibrations of the ducks splashing in their pond. Now he was somewhere else, somewhere cold and dark, and wrong in every way that mattered to a 7-year-old boy who had never spent a night away from his parents. Danny pushed himself up to a sitting position, his small hands immediately beginning the process of exploration that his parents had taught him. When you can't hear, they had explained, your other senses become your guides and protectors. His fingers traced the rough concrete floor, feeling for clues about his environment. The surface was dusty and gritty, with small debris scattered across it, bits of metal, fragments of what might have been old cardboard, things that spoke of abandonment and neglect. Above him, somewhere in the darkness, came the sound he couldn't hear, but could feel. Footsteps. Heavy boots moving across what must be a floor above his head. The vibrations traveled down through the building structure and into the concrete where Danny sat, creating a rhythm that made his heart race with fresh fear. Someone was up there. Someone had brought him to this place. The basement itself was a monument to industrial decay. Located in the skeletal remains of the old Riverside manufacturing building, on the outskirts of town, it had been abandoned for over a decade when the company moved its operations overseas. In hands, he carried a flashlight that cast wild, dancing shadows on the crumbling walls. When the beam finally found Danny, huddled in the corner like a frightened animal, Marcus felt his first real moment of doubt about what he had done. The boy was so small, so clearly terrified. His dark eyes, wide with fear and confusion, reflected the flashlight beam like those of a deer caught in headlights. Marcus had expected, what? That taking someone else's child would somehow ease the crushing grief that had been consuming him for months, that Danny would fill the void left by his own son's death. "Hey there," Marcus said, his voice rough with cigarettes and unshed tears. "You're okay. You're safe now." Danny couldn't hear the words, but he could see the man's lips moving, could sense the tension and instability radiating from him like heat from a fever. Danny's small hands began moving in the sign language that was as natural to him as breathing, trying to communicate his fear and confusion. His fingers spelled out "mama" and "home" and "scared," the graceful gestures flowing together in the universal language of a child's distress. But Marcus, staring at the moving hands with incomprehension, felt only growing frustration. The boy's silent attempts at communication looked like meaningless gestures to his untrained eye. "Stop that," Marcus snapped, his voice rising with panic. Just talk to me. Tell me what you need." Danny's hands moved more frantically, trying to bridge the gap between their two worlds. He pointed to himself, then made the sign for his name, a simple gesture his parents had taught him before he could even walk properly. But to Marcus it looked like random waving, like the boy was mocking him or being deliberately difficult. The basement around them seemed to absorb their failed attempts at communication. The concrete walls, stained with years of moisture and neglect, offered no comfort to either the terrified child or the increasingly desperate man who had brought him there. High above, small windows had been boarded up years ago, blocking out any trace of natural light and making the space feel like a tomb. Danny's exploration of his prison began with the methodical thoroughness his father had taught him during their games of treasure hunting in their backyard. He mapped the walls with his fingertips, discovering that he was in a rectangular space approximately 12 feet by 15 feet. The door at the top of the stairs was solid wood, and when Marcus had left briefly and Danny had crept up to test it, he found it secured with what felt like multiple locks. The windows, even if he could somehow reach them, were completely blocked. Danny's small fingers found the edges of plywood sheets that had been nailed over the glass years ago, creating a barrier that would be impossible for anyone to breach, let alone a 7-year-old boy. Each discovery added another layer to his growing understanding. He was trapped, completely and utterly, in a place where no one would think to look for him. As the reality of his situation settled over him like a suffocating blanket, Danny curled back into his corner and did something he had learned to do during difficult moments throughout his short life. He closed his eyes and tried to remember his mother's face, the way her hands moved when she told him stories at bedtime, the safe feeling of being held between his parents as they read together in their special visual language of love. In the consuming darkness of his concrete prison, Danny began to do what children do when faced with the unthinkable. He adapted. The first night had been a nightmare of terror and confusion, but as the second day dawned somewhere above his boarded-up windows, Danny's natural resilience began to assert itself. His parents had raised him to be independent despite his disabilities, and those lessons were about to serve him in ways they could never have imagined. Danny's systematic exploration of his environment became more thorough with each passing hour. He discovered that the basement wasn't completely empty. In one corner, he found a musty old blanket that smelled of motor oil and dust, but provided some protection against the cold concrete floor. Near what he determined was the far wall, his searching fingers located a plastic cup that had been left behind by the building's previous occupants. These small treasures became the foundation of Danny's survival strategy. He carefully positioned the blanket in the corner that felt warmest and safest, creating a small nest where he could retreat when fear threatened to overwhelm him. The cup became precious beyond measure when Marcus, in one of his brief, awkward visits, left behind a bottle of water that Danny carefully rationed, using the cup to measure out small sips that he made last as long as possible. But it was Danny's memories that truly sustained him during those dark hours. Each night, as he lay on his makeshift bed, with the rough blanket pulled up to his chin, Danny would close his eyes and recreate the bedtime stories his parents told him in sign language. His hands moved in the darkness, spelling out the familiar tales that had comforted him since infancy. He remembered the story of the brave little rabbit who got lost in a dark forest but found his way home by following the light of the moon. His fingers traced the signs for brave and home and light, the muscle memory of those words, providing comfort even when he couldn't see his own hands moving. He thought about the tale of the silent bird who couldn't sing, but whose beautiful dance brought joy to all the animals in the meadow. A story his mother had created especially for him, to help him understand that the difficult conditions. Now in his basement prison, Danny performed these exercises with the solemnity of a religious ritual. He would count his stretches by pressing his fingers against his palm, marking each repetition with the careful precision his father had insisted upon. "If you're ever scared or alone," his father had told him during one of their camping adventures, "remember that your body is strong and your mind is stronger. Do your exercises, count your breaths, and think about all the people who love you." During his third day in captivity, Danny made an extraordinary discovery within his own imagination. As he performed his daily routine of exercises and exploration, he began to talk to an imaginary friend, a dog he called Rocky, though he had no way of knowing that a real dog by that name was searching for him at that very moment. In Danny's mind, Rocky was the perfect companion, patient, understanding, and capable of communicating without words. Danny would sign to his imaginary friend, telling him about his fears and his hopes, describing the basement and sharing his memories of home. The imaginary Rocky never judged him for being scared, never grew impatient with his repetitive questions about when someone would come to rescue them. "Rocky," Danny's hands would spell out in the darkness, "do you think Mama and Daddy are looking for me?" In his imagination, Rocky would nuzzle against him with warm, reassuring presence, somehow conveying without words that of course his parents were searching, that they would never stop looking until they found him. The hunger was becoming a constant companion now, a gnawing emptiness in Danny's stomach that made him feel weak and dizzy. Marcus had brought him food twice, crackers and a sandwich that tasted stale, but it wasn't nearly enough to sustain a growing boy. Danny found himself thinking constantly about his mother's cooking, about the pancakes she made on Sunday mornings, shaped like his favorite animals, about the way she would let him help measure ingredients, even when it made the kitchen messy. But even as his body grew weaker, Danny's spirit remained remarkably strong. He had inherited his mother's gentle determination and his father's quiet strength, and these qualities served him well in his darkest hours. He created structure in his days, marking time by the rhythm of his exercises, the careful rationing of his water, and the comforting repetition of his signed stories. Most remarkably, Danny held on to hope. Despite the darkness, despite the cold and hunger and fear, some essential part of him refused to believe that this was how his story would end. He was 7 years old, and 7-year-olds possess a kind of faith that adults often lose, a belief that love is stronger than fear, that parents are capable of miracles, and that even in the darkest places, someone will always come looking for you. As he settled down for what he hoped would not prison, Danny's hands moved once more in the familiar signs that had become his prayer. "Mama, Daddy, find me. I'm being brave just like you taught me." Marcus Webb sat in the run-down kitchen of the abandoned building above Danny's prison, staring at a cold cup of coffee and wrestling with the growing realization that he had made a catastrophic mistake. The small television he had brought to the hideout was tuned to the local news, and every hour brought fresh updates about the massive search for Danny Martinez. The boy's parents appeared on screen repeatedly, their desperate faces and pleading words creating a knot of guilt in Marcus's stomach that grew tighter with each broadcast. He hadn't planned for this. The intense media coverage, the community mobilization, the way the story of a missing deaf child had captured the public's attention and refused to let go. Marcus had imagined that taking Danny would somehow fill the aching void left by his own son's death. 6 months ago. But instead, he found himself trapped in a nightmare of his own making, with a child he couldn't communicate with and a plan that was falling apart by the hour. 7-year-old Tommy Webb had died in a car accident on a rainy Tuesday morning, killed instantly when a police pursuit ended in a collision just 3 blocks from Tommy's elementary school. The fleeing suspect, high on methamphetamines and driving a stolen car, had run a red light at 60 miles per hour and slammed into the side of Marcus's vehicle as he was dropping Tommy off for school. Tommy died before the paramedics arrived. The suspect survived without serious injury. In his grief-shattered mind, Marcus had somehow twisted the tragedy into the fault of the police officers who'd been chasing the suspect. If they hadn't pursued so aggressively through a school zone, if they had called off the chase, if they had done their job differently, Tommy would still be alive. The logic was flawed, born of desperate need to blame someone for an exemplous tragedy. But grief doesn't follow rational patterns. Marcus had quit his job as a maintenance supervisor, stopped caring about his appearance or his bills or anything that had once seemed important. He had spent months sitting in Tommy's room, surrounded by toy airplanes and superhero posters, planning elaborate scenarios of revenge against the police department that he held responsible for his son's death. Taking one of their children, or at least a child they were trying to protect, had seemed like justice in his twisted thinking. But now, 3 days into his poorly conceived plan, Marcus was discovering that kidnapping a child was nothing like the revenge fantasy he had constructed in his grief. Danny wasn't just a symbol or a tool for Marcus's pain. He was a real little boy, scared and hungry, and completely dependent on Marcus for survival. And Marcus had no idea. Danny's hands moved in what Marcus now realized must be sign language. Marcus felt his own inadequacy, like a physical weight. The boy was trying to tell him something, probably that he was scared, that he wanted to go home, that he needed help. But Marcus couldn't understand a single gesture. "Why can't you just talk?" Marcus had shouted at Danny during one particularly frustrating encounter, his voice echoing off the basement walls. "Just tell me what you need." But Danny's only response had been more of the hand movements that looked like meaningless gestures to Marcus's untrained eye, followed by tears that made Marcus feel like a monster instead of someone seeking justice. The news reports were making everything worse. Sarah and Michael Martinez appeared on television, using both spoken words and sign language to plead for their son's return. And watching them, Marcus felt the first real stirrings of what he had done. These weren't abstract enemies. They were parents, exactly like he had been, facing the loss of their child, just as he had faced the loss of Tommy. The resemblance between Danny and Tommy was becoming harder to ignore. Both boys had dark hair and serious brown eyes. Both were 7 years old. Both loved toy airplanes. When Danny slept, curled up in his corner with the old blanket pulled around him, he looked heartbreakingly similar to Tommy during his afternoon naps. Marcus found himself standing at the top of the basement stairs for long periods, listening to the silence below and trying to convince himself that he was doing the right thing. But Danny's presence was becoming a constant reminder of Tommy rather than a replacement for him. The boy's obvious terror and confusion created echoes of Marcus's own helplessness when Tommy had been dying in that twisted wreckage. And those memories were more painful than the emptiness he had been trying to fill. The practical problems were mounting as well. Marcus hadn't prepared for the logistics of holding a child captive. He didn't know what to feed a 7-year-old, how much water Danny needed, or what to do if the boy got sick. The basement was cold and damp, and Danny's clothes were becoming dirty and inadequate for the temperature. Most troubling of all, Marcus was beginning to see himself through Danny's eyes, and what he saw was the monster he had become. When he brought food to the basement and saw the way Danny shrank back against the wall, his small hands moving in desperate, incomprehensible gestures, Marcus caught glimpses of the man he used to be, the man who would have been horrified by someone who would terrorize a defenseless child. The news was reporting that police had found evidence at the park, that they were following leads, that the search was expanding. Marcus felt the wall peace, while the outside world mobilized to find them. As Marcus sat in the gathering dusk of his 4th day as a kidnapper, he realized that he had created a situation with no good ending. He couldn't release Danny without facing arrest and imprisonment. He couldn't continue holding the boy without feeling the weight of what he was doing to an innocent child. And he couldn't make Danny's presence fill the hole that Tommy's death had torn in his heart. Danny's silent suffering was becoming a mirror of Marcus's own pain. And for the first time since Tommy's death, Marcus found himself thinking about someone else's anguish instead of his own. The fluorescent lights of the police training facility cast harsh shadows across the obstacle course as Officer Maria Santos knelt beside a young German shepherd, her hands moving in graceful, deliberate patterns. Rocky, barely 2 years old and still growing into his impressive frame, watched her fingers with the intense concentration that would become his trademark. This was 3 years ago, before Danny's disappearance, before Rocky would need every lesson Maria was teaching him. Maria's world had changed forever 18 months earlier, during what should have been a routine drug bust. The warehouse raid had gone sideways when suspects detonated an improvised explosive device, and Maria had been closest to the blast when it went off. The concussion grenade they used had been designed to disorient, not kill, but the confined space and Maria's proximity to the explosion had stolen something precious from her, the gift of hearing that had been her constant companion for 28 years. The doctors had delivered the news with clinical precision. Severe bilateral sensory neural hearing loss, permanent and complete. Her career as a traditional canine officer was over before she had fully understood what was happening to her. But Maria Santos was not someone who accepted defeat easily, and the police department, recognizing her exceptional value, had been willing to explore alternatives. "If I can't hear commands," Maria had told Chief Martinez, with characteristic determination, "then I'll teach my dogs to see them." The concept had been revolutionary for their small department. While working dogs had always responded to hand signals as backup communication, Maria proposed developing a comprehensive sign language protocol that would make dogs equally effective with deaf handlers, or in situations where silence was crucial for tactical operations. Rocky had been selected for the experimental program because of his exceptional intelligence and his natural sensitivity to human emotions. From their very first training session, Maria had recognized something special in the young dog's amber eyes, an unusual capacity for empathy that went far beyond typical canine responses. "Watch, Rocky," Maria's hands had spelled out in the early days of their partnership. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each crafted to be unmistakably clear. "Watch and understand." The sign for "sit" became a closed fist held at shoulder height. "Stay" was an open palm extended forward. "Come" was a beckoning gesture that Rocky learned to respond to even when Maria was 50 yards away. But more than just memorizing commands, Rocky began to understand the emotional undertones behind Maria's movements. When her signs carried urgency, his response became more immediate. When her gestures were gentle and reassuring, he approached with corresponding calm. The breakthrough in their training came during a simulated search exercise. Maria had been teaching Rocky to find hidden suspects, but on this particular day, she decided to modify the exercise. Instead of hiding a police officer acting as a suspect, she hid Jamie, a deaf maintenance worker who communicated primarily through sign language. Rocky's behavior during that search was unlike anything the training supervisors had seen before. Instead of using his standard aggressive search techniques, Rocky approached Jamie's hiding spot with unusual gentleness. When he found the man, instead of the typical alert bark that indicated a suspect, Rocky simply sat down and looked back at Maria with what could only be described as a questioning expression. He knows, Maria had explained to the amazed training team. He can sense that Jamie communicates differently, and he's adjusting his response accordingly. This revelation led to months of specialized training that would make Rocky unique among police dogs. Maria taught him to recognize and respond to the subtle visual cues that deaf people used, the way they oriented themselves to maximize their visual field, how they used peripheral vision more actively than hearing people, the importance of maintaining eye contact during communication. But more importantly, Maria helped Rocky develop what she called empathic intelligence, the ability to sense when someone was struggling to communicate and to respond with patience rather than standard police dog protocols. Some people speak with their hearts and hands, Maria had told Rocky during one of their final training sessions together. Her own hands moved as she spoke, creating a visual poetry that Rocky had learned to read as fluently as other dogs read scents. They're not broken or less than anyone else. They just use a different language. Your job is to be patient with them, to protect them, to understand that their silence isn't emptiness. Rocky had pressed against Maria's leg in response, his way of acknowledging the lesson that went far beyond traditional police training. In that moment, both dog and handler understood that they were preparing for situations that no training manual had ever anticipated. Maria's retirement had been bittersweet. The department recognized her groundbreaking work by establishing the Santos Protocol for training dogs to work with deaf and disabled community members. But saying goodbye to Rocky, that time had been one of the hardest things she had ever done. "Remember what I taught you," she had whispered to Rocky during their final moment together, her hands spelling out words of love and encouragement. "There are people out there who need someone who understands their language. Be that someone." Rocky's new partnership with Officer Davis had been an adjustment for everyone involved. Davis was a competent, caring officer, but he approached police work with traditional methods and didn't initially understand the depth of Rocky's specialized training. To Davis, Rocky was simply an exceptionally well-trained police dog with some unusual skills. But Rocky carried Maria's lessons in his heart and memory, waiting for the moment when all that specialized training would serve its true purpose. He couldn't know that moment was approaching rapidly, that somewhere in the city, a 7-year-old boy who spoke exactly the language Maria had taught him to understand was desperately in need of someone who could bridge the gap between the hearing and deaf worlds. The memories of Maria's gentle hands and patient instruction had become part of Rocky's core identity. Every day he practiced the empathy she had taught him, seeking out opportunities to use his unique skills. When that opportunity finally came, in the form of Danny Martinez's disappearance, Rocky would be ready to honor everything Maria had invested in him. Officer Davis stood at the edge of Meadowbrook Park, watching Rocky with growing bewilderment, as his partner's behavior became increasingly unlike anything he had witnessed in their 18 months of working together. Instead of following the standard search protocols they had practiced countless times, Rocky seemed to be conducting his own investigation, based on criteria that Davis couldn't understand. For the past hour, Rocky had been leading Davis away from the primary search areas, where other canine units were working, while the other dogs focused on the most obvious locations: wooded areas where a frightened child might hide, drainage ditches, abandoned vehicles. Rocky kept returning to specific spots that seemed to hold no particular investigative value. The playground equipment designed for disabled children drew Rocky's attention repeatedly. He would approach the modified swings with their additional support structures, the wheelchair-accessible merry-go-round, and the sensory play equipment with an intensity that suggested these items held crucial importance. Davis watched, puzzled, as Rocky would sniff these areas thoroughly and then sit quietly, as if processing information that went beyond simple scent detection. "What are you thinking, boy?" Davis murmured, kneeling beside his partner. "What am I missing here?" Rocky's response was to trot purposefully toward another section of the park that Davis had initially dismissed as irrelevant to their search. This area contained a small amphitheater where the Parks Department occasionally held community events. Rocky's nose worked the ground methodically, but his body language suggested he was searching for more than just Danny's scent. Detective Chen approached them, her notebook filled with witness statements and evidence reports. "How's Rocky doing with the search?" "That's just it," Davis replied, scratching his head in confusion. "He's not following normal search patterns. It's like he's looking for something specific, but I can't figure out what." As if to demonstrate Davis's point, Rocky suddenly became very alert. His attention focused on a small section of the amphitheater's seating area. He approached the spot with his tail held high and his ears forward, body language that indicated discovery rather than simple interest. "There's nothing there," Davis said, examining the empty concrete bench where Rocky had stopped. "Just an old bench where people sit during shows." But Rocky's behavior suggested otherwise. He was displaying the same focused attention he showed when he had found significant evidence, but there was nothing visible to justify his excitement. Davis was about to call Rocky away when he noticed something that made him pause and reconsider his partner's actions. The bench Rocky had identified was positioned to provide an optimal view of the playground areas, specifically the sections where disabled children would most likely play. Someone sitting here could observe the entire disabled, accessible portion of the park while remaining relatively inconspicuous among other parents and community members. "Detective Chen," Davis called out, his voice carrying a new note of understanding. "I think Rocky might be trying to tell us something about sightlines and observation points." Chen hurried over, immediately grasping the implications. "You think our suspect might have used this location for surveillance?" Before Davis could answer, Rocky was moving again, this time with a purposefulness that suggested he had made an important connection. He led them across the park to the community center building that bordered the eastern edge of the recreational area. Davis had never paid much attention to the community center, assuming it was irrelevant to their search for a missing child. Rocky approached the building's main entrance and sat down in the precise position Maria had taught him to indicate an important discovery. Above the door, a simple sign read, "Riverside Community Center. Sign language classes, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3 p.m. The revelation hit Davis like a physical blow. Danny's parents had mentioned their son attended sign language classes, but Davis hadn't made the connection between those classes and their current search location. Rocky had led them directly to the place where Danny learned to communicate, to the building where he spent hours each week practicing the silent language that was his primary means of expression. "My God," Davis breathed. Place. You've been thinking like Danny would think, haven't you, boy? Rocky's tail wagged once, a restrained acknowledgement that seemed to confirm Davis's breakthrough understanding. For the first time since they had started working together, Davis began to grasp the true extent of his partner's unique training and capabilities. "Detective Chen," Davis said, his voice tight with excitement, "I need to tell you something about Rocky's background that I think changes everything about this search." As Davis explained Rocky's specialized training with Maria Santos, Chen's expression shifted from polite interest to intense focus. The implications were staggering. They had been searching for Danny using conventional methods, but Rocky had been conducting a parallel investigation based on understanding how a deaf child would experience and navigate the world. "You're telling me that Rocky has been trained specifically to work with deaf individuals?" Chen asked, pulling out her phone to call the command post. "More than that," Davis replied, watching Rocky maintain his alert position at the community center entrance. "He's been trained to think like them, to understand their perspective and anticipate their behavior patterns." Rocky's discovery of the community center transformed the entire search strategy. Instead of focusing solely on where a typical 7-year-old might go when scared or lost, they could now consider where a deaf child specifically might try to seek help or find familiar comfort. The center staff, when contacted, provided crucial information about Danny's weekly routine and the routes he typically took between the building and the park. More importantly, they confirmed that Danny was comfortable with the neighborhood around the community center, familiar with the streets and landmarks that Rocky was now investigating with renewed purpose. "This changes everything," Detective Chen said into her radio. "We need to expand our search to include areas where a deaf child would seek visual landmarks and familiar environments. Rocky's giving us a completely new perspective on how Danny might think and move." Davis looked down at his partner with newfound respect and understanding. Rocky hadn't been acting erratically or failing to follow protocols. He had been conducting the most sophisticated missing child search of his career, using skills that Davis was only now beginning to appreciate. "I'm sorry, boy," Davis said quietly, scratching behind Rocky's ears. "I should have trusted you from the beginning." Rocky's response was to stand up and begin moving again, his nose working the air currents as he processed scent information with the benefit of his behavioral understanding. Now that Davis understood what Rocky was really doing, he was prepared to follow wherever his partner's unique intelligence would lead them. With his newfound understanding of Rocky's capabilities, Officer Davis approached the search with entirely different expectations. Instead of trying to direct his partner's efforts, he allowed Rocky to lead, watching carefully for the subtle signs that indicated the dog was processing multiple layers of information simultaneously. Rocky's method was unlike anything Davis had observed in traditional police work. Rather than following a simple scent trail, Rocky seemed to be tracking something more complex, a combination of physical evidence and behavioral prediction that created a three-dimensional map of how a frightened, deaf 7-year-old might navigate through an unfamiliar and dangerous situation. The trail led them away from Meadowbrook Park in a direction that initially seemed random. But Davis now understood that Rocky was following logic patterns that went beyond ordinary canine protocols. They moved through residential neighborhoods where Rocky would pause at bus stops, examine playground equipment, and investigate areas with high visual contrast. Places where a child accustomed to navigating by sight would naturally be drawn. "He's not just following where Danny went," Davis explained to Detective Chen over his radio. "He's tracking where Danny would go." The difference between random movement and purposeful behavior based on how a deaf child thinks. Rocky led them to a small neighborhood park 3 blocks from the community center, where his behavior shifted into what Davis now recognized as his specialized alert mode. Instead of the aggressive posturing, typical of police dogs who had found evidence, Rocky approached potential discoveries with the gentle patience Maria had trained into him. Near a cluster of pine trees that bordered the park, Rocky found what his sensitive nose had been seeking: a small piece of red fabric, caught on a low branch, exactly at the height where a 7-year-old boy's shirt might snag if he were moving through the area quickly or being pulled along by someone larger. Davis carefully bagged the fabric fragment while Rocky continued his investigation. The dog's nose worked the ground methodically, but his attention kept returning to sight lines and visual markers that would be important to someone who depended on their eyes for navigation and safety. The trail became more complex as they moved beyond the residential area, toward the industrial district on the outskirts of town. Rocky's behavior indicated that the scent was becoming stronger, but also more disturbing. His ears were laid back slightly, and his tail had stopped wagging, body language that suggested he was detecting signs of distress. "The scent is changing," Davis reported to the search coordination team. "Rocky's indicating that Danny was under stress when he passed through this area. We're heading toward the industrial district now." The landscape around them shifted from family neighborhoods, suggested that Danny had been brought here against his will, carried or dragged through an environment that would have been terrifying to a child accustomed to the safety and visual familiarity of his neighborhood. Rocky paused at a chain-link fence that surrounded an abandoned automotive repair shop, his nose working intently at a spot where the metal mesh had been bent and twisted. Davis examined the area carefully and found several dark threads that matched the color of the jeans Danny had been wearing when he disappeared. "We've got more evidence," Davis radioed, his excitement carefully controlled. "Fabric samples matching Danny's clothing description, caught on a fence bordering the industrial district. Rocky's trail is leading us deeper into the abandoned buildings area." The implications were sobering. If Danny was being held somewhere in this industrial wasteland, his chances of being found by conventional search methods were minimal. The area was vast, filled with empty buildings and hidden spaces where someone could conceal a child indefinitely. But Rocky's specialized training was giving them advantages that no other search method could provide. Rocky's understanding of how a deaf child would experience captivity allowed him to focus on specific types of locations. He led them past buildings with multiple exit routes, places where someone dependent on visual cues would feel less trapped, and focused his attention on structures that would seem particularly frightening to someone who couldn't hear approaching danger. The old Riverside manufacturing building loomed ahead of them, a concrete monolith surrounded by weeds and industrial debris. Rocky's entire demeanor changed as they approached the structure. His training and instincts were converging on something that made every nerve in his body stand at attention. "This is it," Davis said quietly into his radio, watching Rocky's body language indicate the strongest response they had seen all day. "Rocky's found something significant at the old manufacturing plant. We need backup and the full tactical team." Rocky approached the building with the careful precision that Maria had drilled into him during countless training exercises. His nose worked the air currents, processing scent information that told him everything he needed to know about what lay ahead. Somewhere inside this building was the boy they had been seeking, the child who spoke the same silent language that Rocky had been trained to understand. But Rocky's training had taught him more than just how to find deaf individuals. It had taught him how to approach them without causing additional fear or trauma. As they prepared to enter the building, Rocky's demeanor shifted from that of a police dog closing in on a target to that of a therapy animal preparing to comfort someone in desperate need. Davis felt the weight of responsibility as he called for backup and prepared for what his career. But he also felt a profound gratitude for his partner's unique abilities and for the foresight of Officer Maria Santos, whose innovative training had created the perfect tool for this exact situation. Rocky sat quietly beside the building's main entrance, his ears alert for sounds that Davis couldn't hear, but his eyes soft with the empathy that would soon be crucial in communicating with a traumatized child who had been waiting 3 days for someone who could understand his silent language. By the second morning, Danny's disappearance had grown from a local tragedy into a regional mission that gripped hearts across 3 counties. The 7-year-old deaf boy had vanished from his favorite park while flying his toy airplane, and now his photo flooded Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. At Lincoln Elementary, his classmates turned the art room into a poster factory. Even the youngest students drew flyers that included simple sign language: help, safe, home, taught by Mrs. Patterson, so Danny would understand if he saw them. "He doesn't talk with his mouth," 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez said, "but we love him anyway." The deaf community mobilized immediately. Robert Chen from the Riverside Deaf Center briefed search teams. "Danny can't hear voices calling. He'll look for visual comfort, familiar landmarks, clear sight lines." Deaf volunteers searched in silent coordination, using light patterns instead of voices. By day 3, CNN was running hourly updates under the nickname, "The Search for Silent Danny," a term that made his mother, Sarah, wince. Danny wasn't silent, just different. Media attention brought hundreds of tips, both helpful and false, but also more resources. Search teams from other counties, donated supplies, and 10,000 free flyers. Sarah and Michael Martinez lived between hope and despair. Their small home turned into a command post. Sarah's sister Elena managed logistics, urging, "He's not giving up and neither are we." Michael joined every search suite, mapping leads with an engineer's precision. Support came from other parents of disabled children, from the deaf community offering translation for interviews, and, perhaps most touchingly, from Danny's classmates, who kept his desk ready and practiced sign language songs for when he comes back. Danny, meanwhile, had survived 3 days in a cold concrete basement. Weak from hunger but unbroken in spirit, he scratched a tally on the wall each morning, rationed water, did exercises, and told himself the bedtime sign language stories his parents had once signed beside his bed. He'd learned to signal basic needs to Marcus, his confused captor, pointing to his mouth for food, to water when thirsty. Meals were meager, crackers, stale sandwiches, but enough to keep him alive. At night he dreamed of home, of ducks in the park, of his parents' hands signing stories of brave children finding their way. On the 3rd day he discovered a crack in the wall letting in air, scented with grass and flowers. Through it he could glimpse a sliver of sky and passing birds. He practiced the sign for fly, promising himself he'd be free again. To keep loneliness at bay, he talked to his imaginary friend, Rocky, describing the crack, the birds, and what they'd do once home. And outside, the real Rocky, a German Shepherd canine, was working without rest. Officer Davis had never seen his partner so relentless. It was as if the dog knew this case was different. The boy inside spoke Rocky's language of silence. Rocky's search had evolved from following scent to tracing behavior patterns, leading them toward abandoned buildings on the city's industrial edge. Here, Rocky's urgency sharpened. He investigated warehouses, loading docks, air currents, Davis trusting his instincts completely. The dog's focus inspired exhausted searchers. "That dog's tracking more than scent," one volunteer said. "He's tracking hope." Detective Chen reorganized the search to follow Rocky's lead. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they reached the Riverside Manufacturing Building. Rocky froze, every muscle sure. This was it. "Command, this is K9 Unit 7, Davis radioed, voice steady. "Strong alert at Riverside Manufacturing. Request backup and tactical support. I believe we've found Danny." Rocky sat at the entrance, disciplined but unwavering, eyes locked on the building. His message to Davis was clear. The boy was inside, alive, and waiting for someone who understood his silent language. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the industrial wasteland as Officer Davis and Rocky approached the Riverside Manufacturing Building. The five-story structure, with its broken windows and graffiti-scrawled walls, loomed like a monument to decay. Most people would pass without a second glance. Rocky wasn't most people. 50 yards out, the German shepherd's careful search pattern shifted into something sharper, urgent. His nose worked in rapid, shallow breaths, reading a story and scent that Davis couldn't see but trusted completely. "Easy, boy. Show me," Davis murmured, heart pounding. Rocky circled the building's perimeter with precision, ignoring weeds and debris, until he stopped at an overgrown section on the east side. There, half hidden by bushes, a small basement window leaked cool, musty air and Danny's scent. Strong, fresh. Davis knelt, peering through the gap in the plywood. He couldn't see much, but the air carried something else: fear, exhaustion, and life. Rocky's rigid stance told him all he needed. Danny was inside. "Command, K9 Unit 7, positive alert, requesting backup and tactical support," Davis radioed. Detective Chen's voice crackled. "Positive? Confirmed. He's in there." Sirens grew louder as backup arrived. Seal focused. "He's alive?" "He's alive," Davis said, watching Rocky hold his vigil at the window. Negotiators called into the building over loudspeakers. Rocky never looked away. This was what he'd been trained for, not just finding, but reaching someone who communicated without words. The tactical team moved in. Chains and locks on the front entrance gave way under practiced hands. Inside, the air smelled of dust and bird droppings. Rocky ignored it all, following the scent trail through abandoned machinery to a heavy basement door. Unlike the rest of the decaying hardware, this one was new, with fresh scratches around the lock. Upstairs, Marcus Webb had been jolted awake by the sound of sirens. For 3 days he drifted between panic and delusion, telling himself taking Danny would somehow heal his grief. Now, hearing boots pounding overhead, he ran, only to find every exit blocked. Police swarmed in. There was nowhere left to go. In the basement, Danny felt the vibrations first. Not Marcus's heavy, solitary steps. These were faster, purposeful. More than one person. His heart quickened. Someone was here. Someone was coming. At the basement door, Rocky pressed his nose to the gap. Certainty radiated from every muscle. Davis tried the handle. Multiple locks, all deadbolted. "Locked from outside. Need the ram." Chen's voice came through. "Suspect in custody. Proceed." The first blow of the ram sent shockwaves through the floor. The second made the frame shudder. On the third, the locks tore free with a metallic shriek. Flashlights pierced the darkness. In the far corner, Danny squinted against the sudden light. 3 days in near total dark made his eyes ache. Shapes moved toward him. Rocky entered first, slow, calm, deliberate. No aggressive advance, no barking, just quiet presence. Danny froze. For days he'd spoken to an imaginary dog named Rocky. Now, impossibly, here was a real one. The shepherd stopped a few feet away and sat, body language radiating safety. Danny's trembling hands began to move in sign. "Help. Please, help." Rocky's amber eyes locked on the boy's gestures. He tilted his head, adjusting to see better, signs of recognition. Tears filled Danny's eyes. This dog understood. After days of failed attempts with Marcus, he'd found someone who spoke his language. "Scared. Want mama," Danny signed. Rocky inched closer, then lay down, tail giving a slow wag. "You're safe." Officer Davis watched, realizing he was seeing the full depth of Rocky's training, search, rescue, and emotional connection. "It's okay, Danny," Davis said softly, though he knew the boy couldn't hear. "This is Rocky. He's here to help." Danny's focus never left the dog. When he signed, "Thank you," Rocky at the doorway. But Chen held them back. "Let Rocky stay. He needs that connection." When the medics finally approached, Danny clung to the dog, wrapping small arms around his neck. Rocky stayed still, absorbing the boy's weight, the shuddering breaths, the unspoken trust. 3 floors above, Marcus Webb was led away in handcuffs. His plan, born of grief and warped logic, had collapsed entirely. He had caused only pain to a child, to a family, to himself. Danny knew none of this. His entire world was Rocky, warm fur under his fingers, steady breathing in his ear. The medic's verdict was encouraging: dehydrated, undernourished, but stable. "This dog's having a tremendous calming effect," one remarked. Danny's fingers found Rocky's collar, tracing the tag. "Rocky," he signed, meeting the dog's eyes. Rocky licked his hand. No translation needed. A bond had formed. As they prepared to leave the basement, Rocky positioned himself beside Danny, ready to guide him out of the darkness and into the light. The basement was dim and stale, but the moment Rocky stepped inside, something shifted. Danny sat curled in a far corner, his thin frame trembling after 3 days of terror. His eyes locked on a German shepherd, a silent lifeline in a world that had failed him. Rocky stopped a few feet away, close enough to comfort, far enough to respect the boy's fragile space. Around them, paramedics, police, and Detective Chen spoke in urgent voices, but none of it reached Danny. People's mouths moved. Words fell into the air, but they weren't his language. Rocky was different. The dog's stillness, his steady eyes, spoke in the same silent vocabulary Danny had known all his life. Tentatively, Danny lifted his hands. "Scared," he signed. Rocky's response was subtle, shifting closer, posture relaxed, tail still. Then, "Hungry." Rocky's ears tipped forward, his gaze flicking toward Officer Davis, as if to translate. "This boy needs food." Danny's final sign broke every heart in the room. "Want mama." Tears rolled down his dirty cheeks. Rocky closed the distance, his warm breath brushing Danny's hand. The boy flinched, then stilled. A connection sparked, quiet but undeniable. For the first time in 3 days, Danny's expression softened. A small, tentative smile bloomed like the first flower after a harsh winter. Rocky nuzzled his hand gently, grounding him. Riverside General, chaos swirled, news crews, police, hospital staff, but Rocky placed himself between Danny and the noise, a living barrier of calm authority. Reporters and curious onlookers kept their distance. One glance at the dog's posture made it clear that no one got near without permission. Danny sat on the stretcher, upright now, hands moving. "Thank you," he signed formally to Rocky. The dog lay down beside him, chin within reach, offering silent reassurance. Dr. Kim leaned to Officer Davis. "He's not just protecting him. He's creating a therapeutic space. It's letting Danny start to trust again." Helicopter blades thudded overhead. Danny pointed. "Flying." Rocky followed his gaze, then wagged once. just enough to share the moment. Danny's parents were racing to the hospital from opposite ends of the city. Sarah had screamed with joy when she heard. Michael had abandoned his car mid-road to grab a police cruiser. But until they arrived, Rocky remained Danny's guardian. When the reunion came, it was raw and overwhelming, Sarah sobbing into her son's hair, Michael's hands trembling as he held him. Danny signed over and over, "Mama, Daddy, missed you so much." Rocky stayed close, watchful but gentle, understanding his role was shifting, not ending. That night, Danny lay in a pediatric bed. Rocky refused the corner mat, settling beside him instead, angled so he could watch both boy and doorway. The nightmares came just after midnight. Danny thrashed, hands signing frantically under the covers. Bad dream, scared, dark place. Rocky rose without sound, placing his chin on the mattress edge. Danny's eyes snapped open to find the dog's calm gaze. The terror ebbed. Nurse Jennifer Walsh, passing by, stopped in the doorway. "How's our patient doing?" she whispered to Rocky, half serious. The dog's tail gave a single wag before his eyes returned to Danny. The pattern repeated. Distress, Rocky's quiet intervention, peace restored. Dr. Kim, watching the monitors, noted the boy's steadier heart rate and relaxed breathing. "That dog is better than any sedative we have," she murmured. The staff adapted, approaching quietly, greeting Rocky first, respecting the invisible circle of safety around the bed. By dawn, Danny had slept longer than at any point since the ordeal began. Morning light spilled across the room as he opened his eyes and found Rocky exactly where he'd been all night. A slow smile spread across his face. A small figure in the hospital bed. Danny's carefully held composure cracked the instant he saw them. His hands flew in frantic signs. "Mama, Daddy, I was so scared, but I was brave like you taught me. Dark place, couldn't get out. I remembered your stories. I waited for you. Rocky came. Rocky understood me. Rocky saved me." Sarah gathered him into her arms with a fierce tenderness that only a mother who thought she'd lost her child could summon. Michael wrapped them both up, holding on as if he could anchor their world back together through sheer will. For long moments, no one spoke. Danny, because he was finally safe. Sarah and Michael, because they couldn't speak through the tears. Rocky lay beside the bed, tail gently swaying, his steady gaze fixed on Danny. He knew his role had shifted from rescuer to guardian, but his attention never wavered. "Tell us about Rocky," Sarah signed, noticing her son's eyes kept returning to the German shepherd. "Rocky talks like us." Danny's signs grew animated. "He understands my hands. Watch." He signed, "Sit." Rocky obeyed instantly, maintaining eye contact. Then, "Thank you," and Rocky's tail wagged. Michael stared, incredulous. How is this possible? Dr. Kim, standing in the doorway, explained. Rocky was trained by a deaf officer to understand sign language. Without that training, we might never have found Danny in time. The weight of that sank in. For 7 years, they'd fought to help Danny connect with the world. Now, a dog had bridged that gap instantly. Outside, media vans clogged the street. Officer Davis fielded questions about Rocky's training, crediting Officer Maria Santos's inclusive K9 program. "Rocky's unique skills saved Danny's life," he told reporters. "He's a bridge for communication where none existed." Chief Martinez, at a press conference, praised search teams and the community. But when speaking of Rocky, his voice softened. "He represents the best of law enforcement. Service, understanding, inclusion." Inside, Danny ignored the frenzy. He was focused solely on his parents and Rocky. Each sign he made was met with an understanding response, and each exchange stitched a little more trust back into him. Over the next 2 days, hospital staff noticed something unusual. Danny's hand never left Rocky's fur. When anyone hinted the dog might step away, Danny's distress spiked. "Rocky stays," he signed firmly to nurses, to orderlies, to anyone who came near. Rocky seemed equally unwilling to leave, always keeping part of it. "Trust. We need to protect this bond." As if on cue, Danny spotted a cardinal outside the window and signed about its red feathers. Rocky followed his gaze, tail wagging once in shared acknowledgement. The ease of it made Sarah's eyes glisten. This was communication without effort, without barriers. On the 3rd day, the calm shattered. Officer Davis entered the room, face heavy. "I just got the call. Rocky needs to return to active duty. The department's been understanding, but he's needed back on patrol." The effect on Danny was immediate. His signs came fast, hands shaking. "Rocky stays. Rocky doesn't leave. Please." Rocky moved closer, intelligent eyes reflecting the boy's distress. Davis crouched beside the bed. "Maybe we can arrange visits," he offered. But Danny only clung harder to Rocky's collar, tears streaming. "Rocky saved me. Rocky understands me. Rocky stays." Dr. Rodriguez stepped in, voice firm. From a medical perspective, separating them now could cause significant setbacks in Danny's recovery. Sarah's tone carried steel. "We're not letting him lose the one being who understands him best." A hastily arranged call with Chief Martinez followed. "You're telling me this dog's role in Danny's recovery is medically critical?" the chief asked. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "Rocky's not just a hero, he's Danny's proof the world contains understanding. Taking that away now would be devastating." Meanwhile, Danny clung to Rocky like an anchor in a storm. Officer Davis, torn between duty and conscience, spoke into his radio. "I'm officially requesting special consideration. I've never seen a bond like this." The discussion quickly expanded beyond this case. Questions about early retirement, therapy animal certification, redefining what community protection means for canines. In the hospital room, Danny was still pleading in signs. "I need you. You're my best friend. Please don't leave." Rocky answered with the simplest, truest gesture he had, resting his head against Danny's chest, as if to promise he'd stay as long as he could. Whether that promise could survive department policy was still unknown, but in that moment, to boy and dog, the rest of the world didn't matter. The Riverside Police Department's main conference room had seen its share of difficult decisions, but none like this gray Tuesday morning. Chief Martinez sat at the head of the polished oak table, surrounded by administrators, union reps, and legal counsel, with policy manuals stacked nearby like they might hold an answer. Officer Davis, folder in hand, knew they didn't. Inside were Dr. Rodriguez's psychological reports, Danny's hospital records, and photos of a boy and a German shepherd speaking the same silent language. "Officer Davis," the chief said, "present your case." Davis stood. "I'm requesting early retirement for canine reassignment as a certified therapy animal for Danny Martinez." Rocky's unique sign language training was crucial in finding Danny, and is now essential to his recovery. Removing him would be like taking away critical medical care. Captain Williams frowned. Rocky is one of our most valuable assets. We can't retire a dog in his prime over an attachment. Davis slid a photo forward. Danny and Rocky in perfect visual conversation. This isn't just an attachment. Rocky is the only one who can speak Danny's language without interpretation. On the screen, Dr. Rodriguez's voice came steady. In 15 years, I've never seen a therapeutic relationship like this. Rocky is Danny's proof the world can understand him. Separate them now, and you'll undo his recovery. Attorney Sarah Chen raised logistics. Care, expenses, liability. The Martinez family will cover it all, Davis replied. They'll also fund therapy certification to expand Rocky's service role. The union rep asked about precedent. Davis shook his head. Rocky's skills and this rescue's circumstances are one of a kind. This will not set a blanket policy. After a tense recess, the chief returned. The board approves Rocky's early retirement and certification as a therapy animal under department oversight. He will live with the Martinez family, remain a department asset for special cases, and continue specialized training. Davis exhaled. Thank you, Chief. His most important case is just beginning. 3 days later, Davis pulled up to the Martinez home. Rocky stepped from the patrol car, nose twitching as he took in scents. Children's bikes, barbecue smoke, morning coffee, and the boy who had become his world. Danny had been ready for this moment. Welcome signs in English and sign. A cleared corner for Rocky's bed. And rehearsed hands for their first words at home. Welcome home, Rocky. This is our house. We live together now. Rocky's tail swayed, eyes locked on Danny. Inside, Sarah's eyes shone with gratitude. Welcome to your family, she said. Room by room, Danny introduced him to their world. This is my room. Your bed's here, by mine, so we're always together. Rocky inspected the space like a pro, checking sight lines before settling into domestic calm. Michael showed Danny how to prepare Rocky's meals. Rocky waited patiently, eyes never leaving the boy. That evening the doorbell rang. Rocky shifted to alert, positioning himself between Danny and the door. Not aggressively, just present. Still protecting you. The door. The boy fell asleep quickly, his hand outstretched to touch Rocky's fur. For the first time in weeks, he slept without fear. Morning brought sunlight and a rhythm. Danny signed breakfast. Outside. Play. Rocky responded with a wag or a move to the door. Their first walk was a parade of introductions. Mrs. Patterson next door, the mail carrier, curious children. Danny signed proudly. This is Rocky. He saved me. He understands when I talk with my hands. Rocky allowed pets, but stayed focused on Danny. When kids crowded in, he eased between them, calm but firm. At Meadowbrook Park, Danny's steps slowed. His hand found Rocky's collar. This is where the bad man took me. Rocky's posture sharpened, alert, deliberate, but steady. They sat by the duck pond. Danny tossed bread. I was scared when the ducks couldn't hear me. Now I know some friends don't need your voice to understand your heart. Rocky leaned closer, sharing quiet courage. The park felt safe again. Their days fell into a pattern, walks that doubled as lessons. Danny taught Rocky the neighborhood, named flowers, pointed out delivery trucks. Rocky taught Danny calm in the face of barking dogs, patience at crosswalks, and the kind of strength that doesn't need to be loud. Afternoons were for therapy, redesigned by Dr. Rodriguez to include Rocky. Danny signed his feelings. Rocky's nudges and shifts encouraged him to share more. "Rocky makes me feel like my hands have magic," Danny told her. "When I talk to people, they have to work to understand me. Rocky just knows." Evenings ended with storytelling, Danny recounting their adventures, Rocky listening like each detail mattered. Confidence bloomed. Danny ventured farther, smiled more, slept soundly. Each night, his hand rested on Rocky's fur, and fear had no place to stay. In that bond, boy and dog had found more than safety. They had found the beginning of a new life.
"I was scared when the ducks couldn't hear me calling for help,"
Danny signed, tossing pieces of bread toward the eager waterfowl.
"but now I know that some friends don't need to hear your voice to understand your heart."
Rocky's response was to move closer to Danny, close enough that the boy could feel the dog's warmth and steady presence. As they watched the ducks splash and dive for bread, Rocky's calm demeanor seemed to transfer to Danny, helping the boy reclaim this place as a source of joy rather than trauma. Their daily walks became opportunities for Danny to teach Rocky about his world, while Rocky helped Danny rediscover his confidence in navigating that world. Danny would point out, "Explored a new park several blocks from their house. And I'm learning to be brave again because you're with me." The teaching flowed both ways in a relationship. While Danny shared his knowledge of the human world, showing Rocky how traffic lights worked, explaining the difference between mail carriers and delivery trucks, introducing him to the routines of suburban life. Rocky taught Danny lessons about courage, patience, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't need to prove itself. When other dogs barked aggressively during their walks, Rocky's calm, confident response showed Danny how to remain peaceful in the face of hostility. When sudden noises or unexpected movements startled Danny, Rocky's steady presence demonstrated that vigilance didn't require fear, and that strength could be expressed through gentleness rather than aggression. Their afternoon routines included therapy sessions that Dr. Rodriguez had redesigned to incorporate Rocky's presence. Instead of traditional talk therapy, Danny would communicate his feelings and experiences through sign language, while Rocky provided comfort and security. The dog's responses to Danny's signing helped the boy process his trauma while feeling heard and understood. "Rocky makes me feel like my hands have magic," Danny explained to Dr. Rodriguez during one session, his fingers moving in excited gestures. "When I talk to other people, they have to work hard to understand me. But when I talk to Rocky, he just knows what I'm saying right away." Each evening, as they settled into their bedtime routine, Danny would review the day's adventures with Rocky through sign language storytelling. He would recount their walks, their encounters with neighbors, their small discoveries and shared experiences. Rocky would listen with the kind of focused attention that made Danny feel like the most important person in the world. The transformation in Danny's confidence and emotional stability was remarkable. His parents watched with amazement as their son, who had been withdrawn and fearful since his ordeal, began to bloom again under Rocky's patient guidance and unwavering support. The boy, who had once been afraid to venture far from his mother's side, was now leading Rocky on explorations of their neighborhood, his curiosity and joy returning day by day. As Danny drifted off to sleep each night, his hand resting on Rocky's fur, both boy and dog knew that they had found something precious in each other. a partnership that transcended the boundaries of species and communication, built on understanding, trust, and the kind of love that heals broken places and makes new beginnings possible. 6 months had transformed Danny Martinez from a traumatized, withdrawn child into a confident, radiant 7-year-old whose enthusiasm for life seemed to illuminate every room he entered. The changes were so profound that visitors who had known now, struggling to reconcile the fearful boy who had emerged from that basement with the vibrant child who walked confidently through the world with his canine companion by his side. Lincoln Elementary School had undergone its own transformation to accommodate Danny's return, with Rocky as his certified therapy dog. Principal Williams had worked with the district administration to establish new protocols for therapy animals in educational settings, turning what could have been bureaucratic obstacles into opportunities for innovation and inclusion. Danny's classroom had been redesigned with visual learning aids, improved lighting for sign language communication, and a comfortable space where Rocky could rest while remaining available to Danny throughout the school day. The other children's reaction to Danny's return with Rocky had exceeded everyone's expectations. Rather than seeing Danny as different or requiring special treatment, his classmates began viewing him as the coolest kid in school, the boy who could talk to dogs in a secret language, and whose best friend happened to be a genuine hero who had been on television. Rocky's presence had transformed Danny from an isolated child struggling with communication barriers into the center of fascinated attention from peers eager to learn about sign language and dog training. "Danny, can you teach us how to say hello with our hands?" 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez asked during recess, her questions sparking similar requests from a growing circle of children. Danny's face lit up as he demonstrated the sign for hello, then watched with joy as his classmates attempted to copy his movements. Rocky positioned himself where he could monitor the playground activity while allowing Danny the independence to interact with his peers. The dog's calm presence seemed to give other children permission to approach Danny without fear or awkwardness, creating natural opportunities for inclusion that no amount of adult intervention could have orchestrated. Danny's communication skills had blossomed under the combined influence of professional therapy, family support, and Rocky's constant understanding. His sign language had become more complex and expressive, incorporating new vocabulary and grammatical structures that reflected his growing confidence in his primary language. But perhaps most remarkably, Danny had begun experimenting with vocalization, not because he could hear his own voice, but because Rocky's responses to his signed communications had given him confidence that his thoughts and feelings were worth expressing in any form available to him. "Rocky," Danny would practice saying, his small voice uncertain but determined as he worked to coordinate the unfamiliar movements of his vocal cords with the familiar concepts in his mind. Rocky would respond to these vocal attempts with the same attention and understanding he showed to Danny's signs, encouraging the boy to continue exploring the dimension of communication. Mrs. Patterson, Danny's teacher, marveled at the ripple effects of Rocky's presence in her classroom. "The other children are learning empathy and patience they never would have developed otherwise," she explained to Sarah Martinez during a parent conference. "They're discovering that communication takes many forms and that understanding someone requires attention and care, not just hearing what they say." The school's special education coordinator had begun documenting Danny's progress as a potential model for other therapy animal programs. His academic performance had improved dramatically, not because his intellectual capabilities had changed, but because his emotional stability and social confidence had created optimal conditions for learning. He was participating in class discussions through sign language, completing assignments with focus and enthusiasm, and developing friendships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Rocky's integration into the school environment had required careful planning and ongoing adjustment. The dog attended classes with Danny, positioned where he could provide comfort without becoming a distraction. During lunch periods and recess, Rocky supervised Danny's social interactions, intervening with gentle redirection when activities became too overwhelming or chaotic. His presence had become so natural that other students would automatically include Rocky in their plans, asking Danny to translate their invitations into signs that the dog could understand. The broader school community had embraced Danny and Rocky's partnership as a symbol of what inclusion could accomplish when approached with creativity and commitment. Teachers from other schools visited to observe their classroom dynamics. Parents volunteered to learn basic sign language to communicate with Danny, and students began advocating for other children with disabilities to receive similar support and accommodation. Danny's transformation was perhaps most evident in his relationship with new challenges and unfamiliar situations. Where he had once retreated into himself when faced with change or difficulty, he now approached new experiences with curiosity and confidence, secure in the knowledge that Rocky would be there to provide support and understanding when needed. During a school assembly about community heroes, Danny had volunteered to present a sign language performance, his hands moving in graceful patterns that told the story of bravery, friendship, and the power of understanding. Rocky sat beside him throughout the presentation, occasionally tilting his head as if following Danny's narrative, creating a visual representation of perfect communication that moved many in the audience to tears. The assembly had concluded with thunderous applause, not the polite recognition typically given to children's performances, but genuine appreciation for witnessing something extraordinary. Danny's confidence had grown visibly throughout his presentation, fed by the positive response and by Rocky's steady, encouraging presence. As the school year progressed, Danny's influence on his classmates became increasingly evident. Children who had never considered the challenges faced by people with disabilities began asking thoughtful questions about communication, accessibility, and inclusion. The school's culture was shifting toward greater awareness and acceptance, with Danny and Rocky serving as daily reminders that differences in communication didn't create barriers to friendship, understanding, or community participation. The boy, who had once been kidnapped because of his perceived vulnerability, had become a source of strength and inspiration for everyone around him, proving that healing is possible when it's supported by love, understanding, and the kind of patient companionship that transcends the boundaries of species and spoken language. The autumn air carried a crisp promise of winter as Danny Martinez and Rocky walked through the familiar doors of the Riverside Police Department, their arrival causing an immediate stir of excitement among officers and staff who had followed their story since that dramatic rescue 6 months earlier. Danny carried a carefully crafted manila envelope containing his special presentation, his small hands gripping it with the same determination that had sustained him through the darkest moments of his captivity. The transformation in Danny was immediately apparent to everyone who had known him during the crisis. Gone was the frightened, traumatized child who had emerged from that basement. In his place walked a confident 7-year-old, whose bright eyes and eager smile spoke of healing accomplished and strength discovered. Rocky trotted beside him with quiet dignity, his demeanor professional yet warm, as he acknowledged the greetings of officers who remembered him as their K-9 colleague. "Danny!" Detective Chen called out as she spotted them in the lobby, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "And Rocky, you both look wonderful." Danny's response was immediate and enthusiastic, his hands moving in fluid sign language as he expressed his excitement about returning to thank the people who had saved his life. Rocky positioned himself where he could see Danny's gestures, while also monitoring the busy environment, his training evident in the way he balanced attention to his boy with awareness of their surroundings. Officer Davis appeared from the K-9 unit, his face showing a mixture of professional pride and personal emotion as he approached his former partner and the child they had rescued together. The reunion between Davis and Rocky was touching, a moment of recognition between colleagues who had shared the most important case of their careers. "How are you doing, partner?" Davis asked Rocky, kneeling down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Rocky's tail wagged with restrained enthusiasm, his body language conveying both affection for his former handler and contentment with his current role as Danny's companion. Danny had prepared for this visit with the same meticulous care he brought to all important communications. His handmade card was a masterpiece of 7-year-old artistry, construction paper decorated with carefully drawn pictures of himself and Rocky, surrounded by hearts and stars, and the words "thank you" spelled out in both English letters and finger-spelling positions. "I made this for everyone who helped find me," Danny signed, his gestures precise and confident, as he presented the card to Detective Chen. "Rocky and I wanted to come back and say thank you for saving us and for letting us stay together." The card's interior revealed even more elaborate artwork, a detailed drawing of the police station, complete with individual portraits of the officers Danny remembered from his rescue, and a large illustration of Rocky wearing both a police badge and a therapy dog vest, representing his transition from law enforcement to healing companion. Detective Chen studied the artwork with obvious emotion, pointing to each figure and asking Danny to identify the people he had drawn. Danny's responses were animated and detailed, his memory for faces and kindnesses remarkably clear, as he recounted specific moments from his rescue and recovery. "This is Officer Davis and Rocky finding me," Danny signed, pointing to a drawing that showed a man and dog opening a door to reveal a small figure huddled in a corner. "And this is Dr. Kim helping me feel better in the hospital. And this is you, asking Rocky to stay with me because you knew we needed each other." Chief Martinez emerged from his office to greet Danny and Rocky personally, his usually stern demeanor softening as he knelt to Danny's eye level. "Danny, I want you to know how proud this department is of both you and Rocky. You've shown incredible bravery, and Rocky has shown us new ways to serve our community." Danny's presentation continued as he led Rocky through the police station, pointing out locations and explaining their significance in his rescue story. Rocky's behavior during this tour was remarkable. The dog clearly remembered the building and his former colleagues, but his primary attention remained focused on Danny, reinforcing the completeness of his transition from police dog to therapy companion. In the K-9 training area, Rocky encountered his former training partners and instructors, creating a series of reunions that spoke to the dog's ability to maintain relationships while adapting to new roles. The other K-9 officers approached Rocky with respect and curiosity, seeming to recognize that their former colleague had undertaken a mission of equal importance to police work, though fundamentally different in nature. Officer Davis found himself moved. Rocky as a partner, but seeing him like this, seeing what he's accomplished with Danny. I know we made the right decision. The visit concluded with photographs and promises to stay in touch. But the most significant moment came when Danny asked to visit the evidence room, where his toy airplane was being held. The silver plane, once a symbol of childhood innocence, interrupted by trauma, now represented something different. The beginning of a story that had led to healing, growth, and the discovery of an unbreakable bond between a boy and his canine guardian. "This is where it all started," Danny signed as he held his recovered airplane, Rocky sitting attentively beside him. "But it's also where our friendship began, even though we didn't know it yet." As they prepared to leave the police station, Danny turned back to wave goodbye to the officers and staff who had gathered to see them off. His small hand moved in the sign for "thank you," followed by "friends," and finally, "love." A simple message that conveyed the depth of his gratitude and the completeness of his recovery. Rocky's farewell to his former workplace was equally dignified. A final look around the familiar spaces, a gentle acknowledgement of his former colleagues, and then his full attention returning to Danny as they walked together toward their next adventure, their bond stronger than ever. The golden afternoon sun cast long, warm shadows across Meadowbrook Park as Danny Martinez and Rocky approached the duck pond where their extraordinary journey had begun 6 months earlier. The familiar playground equipment, the gentle slope leading to the water's edge, the old oak tree where Marcus Webb had hidden during his surveillance, all remained unchanged. Yet everything was different because of the confident boy and faithful dog who now claimed this space as their own once again. Danny moved through the park with the easy grace of a child who had reclaimed his world from fear. His backpack contained the usual provisions for feeding the ducks, but also art supplies for a project he was working on, and a new book about dog training that he was determined to read, even though the words were still challenging for him. Most importantly, his pocket contained the silver toy airplane that had been returned to him by the police, no longer a symbol of interrupted innocence, but a reminder of resilience and the power of love to overcome even the darkest circumstances. Rocky maintained his protective vigilance, but it was the relaxed awareness of a companion rather than the hypervigilance of a guard. His amber eyes swept the park regularly, noting the presence of other families, the activities of children and dogs, the approach of anyone who might interact with Danny. But his primary focus remained on his boy. His activity attracted attention from other children who recognized him as the boy with the amazing dog who could understand sign language. Rather than avoiding the social interaction as he might have done before his ordeal, Danny welcomed the approaching children with enthusiasm and confidence. "Hi, I'm Emma," said a girl about Danny's age, approaching with the careful politeness children use when they want to make friends, but aren't sure how to begin. "Is that really Rocky, the dog who saved you?" Danny's face lit up as he signed his response, his hands moving in fluid gestures that had become second nature. Rocky, understanding that Danny was engaging in social interaction, positioned himself to be approachable while maintaining his protective awareness. "This is Rocky," Danny signed, then spoke the words aloud in his careful, determined voice. "He understands sign language. Watch." Danny demonstrated by signing "sit" and "shake hands," which Rocky performed perfectly, causing the gathering children to gasp with amazement and delight. "Can you teach us some signs?" asked a boy with a soccer ball under his arm, his curiosity overcoming any initial shyness about communicating with someone who was different from him. Danny's response was to launch into an impromptu sign language lesson, his confidence growing with each successful exchange. He taught the children signs for friend, play, happy, and dog, patiently correcting their finger positions and celebrating their efforts with genuine enthusiasm. Rocky watched these interactions with calm approval, occasionally responding to sign commands from the new students to demonstrate the effectiveness of visual communication. As Danny worked with the children, teaching them his language and learning about their interests and personalities, an observer might have detected the internal dialogue that accompanied his external confidence. Though Danny couldn't speak the words aloud with full fluency, his thoughts flowed with perfect clarity. Before Rocky came into my life, I thought communication meant finding people who could understand my hands, but Rocky taught me something bigger, that real communication happens in hearts, not just in words or signs. When I was trapped in that dark place, scared and alone, Rocky found me not just with his nose or his training, but with his ability to understand that I needed someone who could speak the language of caring, of patience, of never giving up on someone who's different. Rocky showed me that being different isn't being broken. My hands speak as clearly as anyone's voice, and my thoughts matter just as much as anyone else's. He taught me that friendship doesn't need perfect communication, it needs perfect understanding. And understanding comes from wanting to connect, from being patient while someone finds their words, from believing that everyone has something important to say. The afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the park in the golden hues that photographers call magic hour. The impromptu sign language class had expanded to include parents who had been drawn by their children's excitement, creating a small community of people learning to communicate across the boundaries of hearing and deafness. As the gathering began to disperse, with new friends promising to practice their signs and return to learn more, Danny found himself alone with Rocky once again, by the duck pond. The ducks had finished the bread and were settling into their evening routines, creating gentle ripples across the water's surface that caught and reflected the fading light. Danny turned to Rocky, his small hands moving in the signs that had become their most important conversation. Not because the words were complex, but because they carried the weight of everything they meant to each other. "I love you, Rocky," Danny signed, his fingers forming the gestures with the same reverence some people reserve for prayers. "You saved my life, but more than that, you showed me how to live it. You taught me that I don't have to be afraid of being different, because different can be wonderful when someone understands you." Rocky's response was perfect in its simplicity and profound in its meaning. The dog stepped closer to Danny, gently resting his noble head against the boy's chest in a gesture that spoke of acceptance, devotion, and the kind of love that transcends every barrier humans create between themselves and the world around them. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, boy and dog, silhouetted against the golden water, they embodied a truth that reaches beyond the boundaries of their individual story, that understanding is possible between any beings willing to listen with their hearts, that communication is about connection rather than words, and that love, patient, accepting, faithful love, can overcome any challenge, heal any wound, and bridge any gap between souls seeking to touch across the mysterious distances that separate one heart from another. The silver airplane in Danny's pocket caught the last rays of sunlight as he stood up to head home, and for just a moment, it seemed to sparkle with the promise of all the adventures yet to come, for a boy who had learned to speak with his hands and a dog who had learned to listen with his heart. Danny and Rocky's story reminds us of something beautiful, that love doesn't need words to be understood.
German Shepherds like Rocky possess an extraordinary loyalty and intelligence that goes beyond what we often imagine possible. They don't just serve, they genuinely care, forming bonds that can literally save lives and heal broken hearts. The connection between humans and dogs runs deeper than companionship. It's about understanding, patience, and the kind of unconditional acceptance that makes us better people. Rocky didn't just rescue Danny from that basement. He showed him that being different isn't being less, and that true communication, that spark
happens heart to heart. If you've been touched by their story and find yourself wanting to strengthen the bond with your own dog, you might appreciate learning more about how these remarkable animals think and communicate. There's a gentle approach to dog training that honors the intelligence and emotional depth we see in dogs like Rocky, one that builds partnership rather than dominance. Sometimes the most profound connections happen when we take the time to truly understand each other, whether we're human or canine.